So hello everybody. This is Anto Budiarjo and welcome to Monday Live, something we do every Monday afternoon at 3. Information about us is on mondaylive.org. Just a reminder, the most important thing here, views expressed here are personal, not of any company or organization. And please do converse with us using the Zoom tools that you all know how to use. Lastly, this deck is on mondaylive.org as well. So if you're interested in any of the links, head over there. So this whole month of September, and this is the last show of September, we've been talking about the Coalition for Smarter Buildings, C4SB. And the agenda for today is our normal chit chat, and then we're going to talk about specs, the most interesting subject in the universe, right? So no, seriously, there's a lot of very interesting stuff that we'll be talking about on that. But before we get there, hand it over to Ken. What's going on, Ken?
Thanks, Anto. We've got, of course, our September issue is online, smarter sustainability, decarbonization, and electrification. And we're now working on October, which we should have out by the end of the week, if I can get all you guys to get your articles to us. It's entitled Collaboration, Integration, and Education. And what we're looking at there is we need to better understand the complex mosaic of our collaboratory teams. Even to do the simplest things, we now must collaborate. And there's just great advantages in that. We pick up whole different twists on how our industry works because we pick up a whole piece of another technology and we build on it. In addition to that, my greatest collaboration of the month was to the industry coming together and helping me put together our education sessions for AHR Expo. That went really well. I'm extremely pleased with everybody just jumping into that, and we very quickly pushed out 11 sessions that we're going to have in Vegas. And Mark Stevens, his comment there is, it's been a long road. We're ready to reignite and the momentum that comes from collaboration at a live event. And I think we've had quite a bit of chatter about that whole collaboration piece that occurs at a live event. So we've got our education sessions. I'm getting very close to, they'll be in our October issue, and then I'll push them off to AHR. We'll basically give our proposals, which they usually go along with. The title is Navigating to Smarter Sustainable BAS, and we have 11 sessions as of now. And here's an example of a few of them. Master system integrators, best practices, OT networks deployed, open discussion for open future, the role of data in achieving smarter buildings, retrofitting for net zero, decarbonization and electrification, smart women and smarter buildings, insight trends and perspectives, and open conversation. So in addition to that, Anto is going to present the stack as well as the coalition. So it should be a really good session. As you can see, their banner is "We're ready to rock." Join us in person for the HVACR industry's premier event. So I'm wishing them well. I hope everything keeps going. Back to you, Anto.
Thank you. That's we're all starting to look forward to Vegas. Yay.
Mm-hmm.
So over to you, Mark.
So I got a trifecta today. So first one is the latest return to office. And again, some of these are on topics that we've discussed over the last year and a half or so. We've been doing this. And what's interesting is this is as of early this morning. What Cushman and Wakefield are saying is that as of September of this month, approximately 40% of all global office workers have returned to the office. The latest COVID-19 projections indicate that global infections related to the Delta variant will peak next month or the month after. and then begin their trend lower, obviously, once they hit the peak. And based on that information, the current rate, most of the world will achieve herd resiliency, which is they're defining as 70% either vaccinated or infected, will be by Q2 2022. Government guidelines will also play a critical role to boost worker confidence. And I think we've talked about how important it is creating that trust factor within the built environment, in particular from those of us in this industry. And if all the assumptions hold true that most office workers will return by the first quarter of next year. So kind of interesting. I'm sure this is fluid. It will change. I personally don't see where 40% of the global office workers have returned to the office yet. But again, maybe more overseas than there are here in North America. Let's move on to the next. So one of our other topics has been getting more folks in our industry, in jobs of all sorts of types. So I found this in an industry magazine, and basically employment for industrial engineers is projected to grow 14% between last year and 2030. About 23,000 plus openings are projected every year for the next decade for industrial engineers. And looking at the profession as a whole, it's projected there will be 140,000 new jobs each year available on the market, advertised, open, whatever, until 2026. That is absolutely amazing when you think about it. Then in Industry Week as well, they define the top 10 engineering schools. And as you can see here, one, Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology being one. And then you can see it, how I've got this here going up or going left, right, et cetera, et cetera. But what's surprising to me is I don't see some of the particulars on here, or some of the expected ones. Where's MIT as an example? Where is Purdue? Where is Penn State? So forth. Steve's alma mater. Should I say that one for you, Steve Fay?
Yeah, well, I'm beginning to think maybe it's because you're focusing on industrial engineers.
I am. This is industrial. You're right.
Yeah,
You're
versus
correct.
software or electrical, chemical. Right.
You're correct. But my point of this is, from the engineering perspective, this is competition for us as well. In other words, if a person decides to go into engineering, are they going into mechanical? Are they going into industrial, or whatever the case is? But the point is, there's lots of opportunities in the engineering community.
Yeah.
So let's move on to the next one. So in case you haven't heard, those folks who deal with contracting with the federal government, you have to have the contractors, subcontractors, and so forth and so on, be vaccinated by December 8th. So if you're dealing with the government, so forth and so on, make sure you are vaccinated, because you will be asked.
Yeah, I'm glad I'm not a federal contractor.
So anyway, that's what I have to share today. Back to you.
It's John.
Hey, yeah, so, we try to bring news together from all of the sources out there trying to drive our industry. I thought this one from James Dice was particularly relevant because it ties in with, I think, themes we've said, which is we have the technology, that's not the problem. And he was commenting on Bill Gates' book, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster, and his, a couple of pull quotes here that he highlighted. For buildings, the technology is there. We need more people to implement it and improve. And where we fall short, policies and markets that are aligned with faster deployment of existing technology. This has been a a theme in numerous of our conversations, right? That's what's holding back having smarter buildings and getting the, and helping people understand how they are financially viable and deliver good returns. So I just thought that was good. I guess I'll take it as a vote of confidence from Bill Gates for now. All right, that's what I got.
Okay, it's the climate expert, right?
Thank you. So talking about climate, our favorite subject, I was chatting to one of the interns is working on the coalition, and it reminded me of this whole concept of the climate core that is being talked about. That's all it is right now. Just came up with these two articles. It's kind of an interesting way of motivating and energizing the hopefully the youth, the next generation, to participate in this venture. So moving on, just as a reminder, this is the last week of September. So next week, we're going to be talking about industry collaboration. We have a number of different organizations that's going to be coming to join us and discuss what they're doing. We have BCIA, which is the Building Controls Industry Association from the UK. We also have BIG, which is the Building Intelligence Group out of Minneapolis and Chicago, that will be joining us, as well as DOE will be joining us over the course of October. So we're very much looking forward to that. Meanwhile, this month is about C4SB. And just as a reminder, these are the 5 areas of focus and alignment that the C4SB is working on: interoperability, analytics, specification, procurement, and workforce. We're going to be focused on the middle one this week, although we're actually going to be talking about number 1 and 2 as well in the process of doing that in terms of the specification work that we're doing. So I'm going to kick off just sort of talking about that a little bit, and then we can open it up. So the way we have decided to think about the specification is to basically focus it on the interoperability component, although there are lots of other components beyond that, and using the smarter stack as a mechanism to frame everything, frame the specification. So that's kind of the way we're doing it. We're calling it Division 2525 as a sort of as a continuation of the Division 25. We all know the importance of that. So 2525, specs so good that we named it twice, kind of a thing. And so what we've done is we've taken each of the 8 layers of the stack and created a section for each of those layers. So there's a layer, there's a section 25.25.10, which is all to do with the purpose of interoperation, which is how we've titled it. And all of this, by the way, is still in progress, so none of it is final, so anything is subject to change. And 20, 30, 40, etc. for each of the different 8 layers, right? So, for example, anything to do with data governance, such as data needs to be secured kind of thing, would easily go into 60. That's kind of the way we're thinking. So that's kind of the way we're doing that. And all of this is wrapped in 25.25.00 that we're calling Master System Interoperability. And the focus of that section is how all of these different sections will be able to interoperate with each other in the appropriate ways. There's a lot of details, obviously, that needs to be worked out, but that's kind of the concept. And so the concept is that we're actually using the structure as a way to specify interoperability, right? So for example, one can see that where it's somewhere in digital applications, where we'll be talking about analytics and various other sort of applications, it would talk about the fact that the data will come, the data will come or will be specified in 60. So anything to do with specifying how the data is governed is in 60 and the applications is in 40. So we're sort of using the different sections, linking the different sections as a way that you would actually link the different elements in a real building, but in a spec. That's the idea anyway. So there's 8 layers. There's one layer that there's one subject that's missing that we should be covered in this, which is cybersecurity, which, as we know, is a top to bottom thing. So that's how we've positioning that as 25, 25, 90. So this is the structure that that we going after. I tried to sort of create a visual of how this would work, just structurally. So this is basically what I had in the previous slide, the master one and the 9 first level one. And the whole idea is that under each one, we would break that down into different subjects, depending on what the area is. So for example, for data information and exchange, which is to do with the exchange layer, we could have a section on interoperability orchestration, which is another way of talking about middleware, right? It's an area that I'm very passionate about. Connection profile sort of things actually is all about that. And so is things like Niagara would sit in here, and other sort of gateway and interoperability things. So that's how that would go. Protocol, communication protocols would go in here, and semantic tagging and ontologies would go in here. So something like Haystack would be specified in here, and there could be other sections, right? So this is a straw man. This is by no means final or even agreed on by the group, but this is kind of the idea. And the cybersecurity would be split into 5, just to give another example. Identify, and these 5s are actually related to the NIST cybersecurity framework. Steve Fay is actually going to be spending quite a bit of time today talking about that. So there's an identify stuff, which is things like asset management and things like that, and protect, which is things like perimeter detections, VPNs, and other things, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of the way we're thinking about it. There's lots of different areas that we need to cover in the specifications. And these are the ones that we've identified in our sort of initial phase. I'm calling this phase 1. There'll be other things that I'm sure that we'll need to create. But these are kind of the obvious ones that are sort of the low-hanging fruit. And what we intend to talk about today is these 2 areas, the analytics area and the cybersecurity area. So I just wanted to do that to explain the methodology that we're using to create these specs, tying it to the smarter stack, and also in a way using the architecture of the specs and the smarter stack to specify interoperability, right? So if we can manage to do that, it could actually be quite interesting. So with that, we could talk a little bit more about the structure of this, and then we can talk about the analytics and cybersecurity. So open it up to the group.
I'll throw out a quick comment. If you've dealt with specs, and I've been dealing with them since I was an application engineer in the early days of Andover Control, sitting not too far from Steve Fay. This is a huge undertaking, and even the organization of these topics around the smarter stack that you've shown here today is a huge step forward, right? To break it down, because I think that historically it's been very much equipment architecture related and control sequence related. And this, I think, embraces where the world has come and is going. So I think this is a tremendous effort here.
I just want to say one thing. I didn't mention this, this is obviously about the division 25. So it's really about the interoperation, right? So where is it? Things like HVAC controls is not going to be in here, because it's got its own division. I think it's division 23 for
25
HVAC.
or 23, yeah, right.
23, right? So we're not dealing with that level of things. We're dealing with the sort of the information control and the interoperation between the different elements. So we're not touching the areas, not as part of this anyway.
Anto, I have a question. I know others have sort of attempted to create their versions of the spec. Did we look at any, or did anyone look at any of those other attempts or other things that are out there when you put this together, or is this kind of greenfield?
I think the structure is greenfield, and John, Jim, and Steve and others will actually talk about how we're, from here on, we're trying to use as much as possible as already exists. So we're not recreating absolutely everything, but I think the structure is greenfield.
Okay.
So with that, I'm going to stop my share, and then we can start talking about analytics, and I'm going to leave it to Jim and John to do that. Jim, you want to start?
John, could you explain to everybody how we kicked off this process and what you did, and then I'll take it.
So, I mean, all of us on this group want to see the industry advance, right? And I jokingly say that the day that Jim Lee and I need to mud wrestle over projects will be the day that the industry is taken off. And
Right.
We'll take pictures, John.
you'd be welcome to.
Frightening sight, John, frightening.
And I think we all agree that we see that owners are confused, need education, et cetera. And so we saw that having a uniform, non-commercial specification will be a helpful part of getting owners to understand and be able to specify analytics projects. How am I doing so far, Jim?
I think that's great, John.
Okay, and so we, and I'm sure everybody else who makes analytics have played the spec game over time and put together a specification language to help clients and engineers that we interact with. And of course, it's biased, right? That doesn't mean there's not there isn't a lot of very good, useful information in there and useful structure. And so when we started to get together, we said, let's contribute that together and hash out and eliminate the commercially biased language, but still focus on the things that owners and engineers need to move forward and deploy analytics successfully and specify projects. So that's what we've engaged to do.
Great. So I think that, if you look at the thesis of what we're trying to accomplish, the industry as a whole, what we do is fairly complicated. And it is new to a lot of people. And as such, they've had to find their way through it, as we had to find our way when we started this industry, the different players that are here. We had to create an industry and put labels on it and put a fence around it. As 70 other people have poured into the industry over the years, unfortunately, those boundaries for what we consider to be analytics have been watered down to the point that they're meaningless. And it's very, very hard for end customers to be knowledgeable enough to differentiate. So what we're searching for is really a least common denominator specification. And then we're still going to welcome that differentiation in terms of proprietary components that people will add on their own after that. But what makes this a really interesting topic rather than a boring specification topic is we're trying to agree at a fundamental level what it is that we do, right? Trying to get that level of agreement. And then if John wants to do it a little different or somebody else wants to do it differently, more power to them. Maybe they're going after a particular segment of the market that's more suited to. I will do my thing, he will do his. But the key is we've got to have at least a base understanding or remedial understanding of what analytics is, so that we don't have 70 people in there claiming to do something that they don't. If they want to go do something else, that's fine. Call it something else and go do it. Create a market there. So the question is how do we create those lines? And I equate it to actually districting, just like the census has come out and people are going to district where their representatives are going to be able to vote. And the proprietary nature of what we add later on our own is the gerrymandering in order to win that business. But right now we need an open level districting process. And in order to do that, John has graciously offered up his specification to me. My team is taking that. We're going to redact anything considered proprietary, add categories that John may not take care of. And then we intend to solicit other input from others as to what the right answer is, and take that through a review process. And we're feeling our way through it now. It's actually quite complicated because we want to allow for all the different approaches that exist in the business for people that are legitimately pursuing analytics. However, we want to divorce the people that are not doing anything legitimate and calling it analytics. So that's the process we've embarked upon.
So Anto earlier said that, reminded us, I think this is Division 23 is where you normally find the HVAC controls. And in today's market, when you have specified analytics, where has it shown up? What division?
It doesn't. I think
It-
I think that the key part here is, and this is the entire point I've made before, that the Construction Specification Institute standards that exist today are for the construction and renovation of buildings. They're
Right.
project focused or they're product focused. They are not process focused. And what we're doing with analytics and how you get there, whether you sell a product, etc., the end solution for analytics is a process. So it's not well represented in the specifications at all.
Okay, so really, we're solving a problem in that the existing CSI specs and structure doesn't have a placeholder or a place for analytics to show up, unlike HVAC controls, which they've been specifying now for decades in one
Correct.
fashion or another. So in that case, we will refer back to Division 23 and maybe even to some other portions of Division 25 for some of the specifics. But it sounds like some of the middleware exchange type areas, we want to have that be specified within this Division 25's portion. Just trying to segregate that certain things are going to appear here that need a place to live versus things that already are living somewhere else in the CSI spec. And in that case, I guess the idea is that we would refer a reference to that if somebody wants the information on that. Is that, Anto, is that what you're thinking? You guys thinking?
Yes, and if you remember, I'll bring up the slide again. Towards the bottom of the stack, there is the system and physical level. Right?
Yep.
So we identified this is, again, needs to be confirmed. That section being the system interface. So that's essentially the way I'm thinking about it, is the way all the smarts, which is really our focus, interfaces to the systems out there. And the systems out there would be the HVAC system that's in Division 25.
Mhm.
That's kind of the thinking, but it's not in here. It's not in 25.
Right. Okay.
So Brian Turner has just made a comment.
Yeah.
This, restating also what I said. I did want to point out that we do see analytics in new construction specs sometimes on the commissioning of buildings. So commissioning of new projects may call out analytics, to be fair.
Right.
Yeah, good point. You do see that show up there, but it's not generally in what we consider, overall building automation, specifications, things like that. Sometimes you see a spec just on the analytics and where it may have been influenced by something I wrote or Jim wrote or something like that. But again, it's I don't know any place you can go for the neutral analytics spec at this stage.
Exactly.
Somebody on the call may know where that is and can point it to us. We weren't aware of it, so we said we ought to do this, right?
Right.
Well, I did that exercise, John. I think I told you guys a couple of weeks back. One of our big customers in the Singapore market approached me about, where is the neutral spec on analytics? And I did a pretty, in fact, I approached you guys and approached you, John. We did a pretty thorough search out there of, where is the neutral spec that actually had some meat behind it. It doesn't exist. In the end, I had to send him, just a collection, amalgamation of pieces. but it's clear end users are, well, the end users are asking for, I need to know what to specify in this space.
Can I ask a question just for clarity? My understanding of Division 25 kind of historically has been that's where integration and exchange of information and sharing of data and things like that is going to go, right? So kind of the mechanics of that piece. But when I think of analytics and when I ask customers or customers ask me about analytics, I think what they're thinking about are specific use cases and functions, show me this, show me that, the results of analytics. When we're talking about the specification, are we on the end of the scale that is about, here's how we're sharing data in order to perform analytics? Or are we specifying specific use cases of analytics?
Both. We definitely want to deal with the interoperability and the data layer and all of that enables you to do it, because I think that's one of the things owners need to, but also the things you should get some minimal level out of analytics. Now they could be, right? Greenhouse gas could be an option, but it should be addressed so that somebody, oh yeah, I could do that, right? So that's my view.
And those things would go at the top levels of the purpose and operations, presumably, right?
So give some examples then, so it paints a clearer picture for everybody of not the sharing and integration of data, but the specific analytics that you guys are envisioning to include in something like this.
I think at a remedial level, you're talking about somebody that is collecting data with a certain ontology, storing that data with a set of algorithms. And we don't have to constrain what the algorithms are, but with a set of algorithms that run against that data to show owners value on energy, maintenance, operations, regulatory issues, comfort, greenhouse gas emissions. These sort of 70,000 foot talking points are where we're going to go. And I'd love to drill down to the 30,000 foot level, but it's not our purpose to drill down to the 10,000 foot level. People are going to do what they do with their products. They're going to customize, they're going to gerrymander these rules so that they have a market niche, and that's just fine. But this idea that somebody hooks a meter up to a screen and that's analytics, that's not fine, because it's very, very hard for the customers to differentiate that. But if we can come up with this least common denominator spec, hopefully we can short circuit that.
So is the goal here to sort of say, look, you don't call this analytics until you get to a certain level of data integration, of use of multiple sources, of certain types of algorithms? Where is the line between, here's your kilowatts coming from your meter and calling that analytics versus what you're envisioning?
Yeah, well, that's what we hope to do and send it around and have people critique it, right? We're trying to make a good faith effort to draw a line that's reasonable, that stops short of being commercially biased, but still shows that, you have to deliver some value to people with the data.
When I listen to you guys talk, it sounds like you're thinking of use cases that are more than calculations, right? Energy consumption per square foot. Is that an analytic or is that a calculation?
Yeah, I think normalizing energy use again, for typical metrics would be something you would expect, an owner would expect to get from their analytics software.
And so Tracy, the way I would answer that is yes, but there should be another bucket for people that are just doing those energy calculations. That should be in the energy information systems bucket. And if that's what you do and what you want to call out, you want to be in that spec, right? So that you're actually competing with other people that do energy information systems, sub-metering, that ilk. And people that are doing analytics, as we've defined it, are doing potentially that. And they're also doing fault detection, diagnostic, and optimization work. Usually algorithmically based, some of it AI based, doesn't matter. We don't need to constrain how it's done. But looking at what the end value propositions are and looking at a minimum for collecting data with standard ontologies, storing that data, and then acting on them to produce different levels of value. So we have to define that.
And I think it's that scale that really throws a lot of end users, right? Because some vendors come in and say, when I normalize your data to degree days or using degree days or to square footage, that's analytics. But then at the other end of this, there are much more advanced things that you can be doing. And I'm guessing most of us on the screen here, that's what we think of when we think of analytics, not the
Right.
normal energy calculations that you would see in a spreadsheet.
But might be at the end of the day that our spec is called the advanced analytics spec. But what we need to do is have the damn spec, because right now it's just diluting the industry, because that blurring of the line doesn't allow the owners or customers a fair chance to understand or compartmentalize the value, right? So the analogy I used the other day is that, we've come up with the rules of football, but if somebody else is playing squash, no problem with playing squash, just don't call football squash. It's a different sport.
Well, and I
I-
think when people would using that example, there's flag football and there's touch football and then there's full on tackle football, right? And maybe what the part that I am having trouble envisioning in articulating this in a spec is in that scale of complexity, what is considered analytics and what is not considered analytics, that piece of it.
The interesting thing is that one could chase that endlessly, but at 0th order, John and I are going to decide right now where those lines are, and then people will have the ability to either agree or disagree with us. We have two competitors here, and we're gonna prime the pump by deciding what we think the lines are, and then invite other people to come in. And some people, might not choose to be supportive of what we decide, and other people might. And other people might go and pioneer the spec for energy information systems, so that they can create the rules of their game.
And so that's kind of the point I'm getting to here. What you're proposing is tackling that scale and putting a line in the sand and saying anything less than this, that's calculations, normalization, just data presentation. Everything above this, when you're doing A, B, and C to it, and the results are X, Y, and Z, that's analytics. I mean, the definition of analytics is what's missing in our market more than anything, I think. It's not the spec. If you ask, when we said this the other day, if you ask 100 people, tell me your definition of analytics and give me some examples, you'd get 100 different answers. And that's
the
part of
definition of solve it, Tracy. You can't solve it in a paragraph. You solve it in a spec that addresses the facets of accomplishing this. So yeah, that's what we're trying to get, is a definition that addresses more than a paragraph can.
And I think that outcome will be hugely useful. There's a lot of the mechanics surrounding this, obviously, when it comes to, if we're inserting this in Division 25, it's all about integration with the other divisions, right? In presenting the data from a fire system in a same ontology as you might get from an HVAC system or a lighting system or whatever it might be. But all of that's necessary. And that's the piece that's been missing in our market mechanically forever, that's preventing integrated smart systems, right? Then what you're talking about is that whole other level of, okay, now that we have specified how to get all of this data into a useful format that we can use, here's what we think analytics looks like. And it's not just energy per square foot kind of a thing. Is that what I'm hearing? I'm just trying to paraphrase a little.
That's what we're going to try to do. It's a pretty
All right.
tall order, and it might not be perfect at first blush, but if we don't start, we're not going to make any headway. So we're going to just take a good stab at it and solicit everyone's input when we get done with round one.
This absolutely reminds me of the Supreme Court ruling on pornography, right? Really hard to define, but man, you recognize it when you see it.
When you see it.
All right. John, Jim, do you have any comments on the numerous comments that have been posted on chat before we move on?
You can keep up with them.
I couldn't keep up with them all.
Sorry
there's
for
a lot.
monopolizing that, but thanks.
No,
That
that
adds
was
a lot of
interesting.
clarity.
That was an important conversation.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I wanted to build on that for a second, Anto, to Tracy's point, because in a lot of ways, it ties back to the discussion we've always been having about the smarter stack as opposed to the smart stack, right? And that the point about the smarter stack is there's a graduation, or, you know, it's always easy to go from something to something better, right? I just think, just for Jim and John's, is there some thought of then putting I don't want to call it graduation, or some form of spectrum into the spec, as far as, you know, this is kind of low end, this is high end, and so let people, you know, oh, okay, I'm kind of here and I want to go here, or I'm here and I want to go to here, but I don't want to go all the way up there. Just building on Tracy's point.
Yeah,
I think this is the touch football versus tackle football argument. And until we get the rules to football down on the page,
Fair enough.
I'm not sure we're ready to segment it, but I think it's not a bad idea.
So where do you guys, let me throw this one at you. So for me, analytics is one of the end results of analytics is outcomes and results. And so, for example, if I'm a building owner and I do, again, Jim, you were talking about energy. So we do all this analytic energy collection analysis and all that, and it finds out that, okay, we can decrease our energy usage by X by doing whatever. So that energy consumption decline yielding a savings of what, as an example, our air handler efficiency and effectiveness from analytics caused a X% savings to CapEx, OpEx, so forth and so on. Do you guys see this as part of the specification as well, or no?
I don't necessarily see that. I think that I can say that in the 20 years we've been at this in aggregate, there are 20% energy savings that take place across multiple portfolios, campuses, types of buildings. That's a pretty safe number. How it falls out, when one looks statistically at it, it's all over the place. So some buildings are huge wastes, some buildings are run very efficiently. So you really need a portfolio approach when you look at it. And I think we want to manage people's expectations that that's true, that you're applying this technology in aggregate because it works. It's been proven to work over long periods of time and very reliably generate those kinds of numbers. But, you know, results may vary. And I don't want to claim to somebody, you hook this up, you know, you're not taking out a 100-watt light bulb and putting in a 50-watt light bulb and saving half. This is not that. This
Let's move. We need to move on.
approach of optimizing systems that yields 20%.
Yeah, we need to move on to cybersecurity. If Steve, if you're ready, I know you have some slides, put it up and we can have that discussion. You're muted. And if you can put it in presentation mode.
Yeah, will do. Yep. How's that?
There you go. Perfect.
Okay. So as Anto pointed out earlier, cybersecurity as a portion of this overall specification by its nature is going to cover the entire stack. Okay. So from the physical, if you think about getting in a door, all the way up to, of course, the purpose of why you're doing cybersecurity or risking, trying to minimize the risks associated with these threats. So what I'm going to do is going through a series of slides here to really talk through how we're thinking about writing the spec. First thing was to develop something that would tie to an existing standard. And there are multiple standards out there. The one we decided to go with is the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. And if you were to pull down the document, it's over 50 pages long. You would see that it's divided into these 4 areas called identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And there are other standards out there. If you're from Europe, you might be familiar with 27001, which is an ISO standard. ISA has 62443. NIST has an additional 800-853. So there are other specs. And what's interesting with the NIST framework is that for every requirement in the NIST framework, there's a corresponding section of those other specs. So it's a well-recognized standard, and I don't think we can go wrong in that regard. So if you dig in, you're going to find that there's a total of 108 different policies that comprise the framework. And for example, within Identify, there are 29 separate policies and 39 separate ones for Protect. So you can spend a whole lot of time trying to figure out what all these policies mean. Since the last time I dug into this thing, one of the nice things that NIST came out with is a quick start guide. And it makes it a lot easier to understand really the purpose of the spec. And so I suggest that you'll see the link down here will take you to it. It's a 3-page document. It's a very quick read. It really hits on the major points of these 5 areas. And I'm going to be using that to run through to give you a feel for how we're intending to apply the framework to the cybersecurity spec. So with that in mind, I'm going to walk through each of the 5 areas. So Identify, as I'm showing you here, is covering the entire length or height of the stack. And in this quick guide that they have here are the 5 things that they identify as being the ones that you really want to focus on. So in particular, Identify means you got to know everything you have. What are all the devices, controls, OT systems, all the associated network gear? You need to know how the information flows. Where does it go from point A to point B, inside and outside of the building? But it also includes things like, if you don't have policies, obviously the goal here is to have them, but within any given policy, there's going to be roles and responsibilities. And those roles and responsibilities are not going to be limited just to your internal employees, but also to your suppliers, your third parties. And then from a risk assessment perspective, you're going to need to really stand back and understand, well, what are my threats and what are my vulnerabilities? So if somebody did get in, what am I worried about? And that conversation is going to vary in terms of the importance depending on the kind of building you are. So if you're a data center, for example, or a hospital, the threats to the OT systems take on a very different intensity, if you will, than if you're, say, just a small retail shop in a strip mall. So it's the importance you place on your risk and then associated policies you're going to want to have in place will vary based on your business environment. But in any event, the point about Identify is that there are going to be areas here in the spec that need to apply and will apply to any and all of the parts that make up the smarter stack. Moving on to Protect. So Protect is really about, a lot of it has to do with asset management, or access management rather. Who gets in and what are they allowed to do? What privileges do they have? Is there multi-factor support required for them to even log in, not just having, maybe a text message sent, but having the device itself be known? So do I approve that laptop to have access to the system? It has to do with protecting your sensitive data. So that means encrypting it. Backups is key from a protection standpoint, because all your best intentions can go out the door for lots of reasons. You can never guard against anything and everything. So you always want to have a secondary backup preferably remote, available to you at the time to quickly recover from something like ransomware. And so just again, protect your devices, manage your device vulnerabilities. That really has to do with keeping your software up to date. And increasingly, your suppliers are coming out with software maintenance agreements to facilitate that. And it would make sense to incorporate those kind of requirements right into the specifications. And then overall around protection is training people. As industry-wide, we don't have a culture of training for cybersecurity, and that needs to change. And it's really from the operations level on down through the supply chain is where training takes place. From a detect standpoint, again, detect will tend to cover the majority of the stack, and this has to do with making sure you know where data is going and being able to detect if it's going somewhere that you didn't expect it, like leaving your building and going to North Korea. And if you don't think that can happen, you're kidding yourself, because it does. And it means that you're making sure that your systems have logging capability, and that you're grabbing those logs and you're auditing those logs routinely to see if activity is a potential problem. And as part of detect, because you're going to find things, you need to think through what the impact of what's going to happen. So if you detect a vulnerability, are you ready to deal with that problem? So that's detect involves a lot of technology. It can be something basic like antivirus software on a server. It can be some monitoring software or network monitoring software that looks for vulnerabilities. Those are the kinds of things that show up in the category of detect. And then for respond, this is really about a people issue, both from an operational standpoint as an owner, and also from your delivery partners, your third parties, to make sure that you have a disaster recovery plan in place. You've actually tested it out. So you go through and you do a sample disaster to make sure everybody knows what to do, that all of various parties that need to be communicated have received their communication. And you need to look at it on a regular basis as things change. And then finally, it's coordination really about your internal and external stakeholders is what respond is all about. But it's things, when bad things happen, are you ready? And does everybody know what to do, both inside and outside your organization? And then lastly, on recover, this is similar in terms of the scope to respond, but it has to do, it goes up a level to include purpose, because you really want your governance level, the highest levels of the organization, to be on board with how we're going to manage things, particularly if I'm a REIT and I've got multiple tenants and I've got a problem. If I put in place my procedures for how I'm going to communicate to everybody, not only during the event, but afterwards, to ensure them that we've addressed the issues, that we've covered properly, and that we've taken steps to mitigate against future attacks of a similar nature. So this is the last part of the 5-step process. And the next step for us in all of this is to take each of these areas and create spec language to address the particulars. So big picture wise, here's the completed stack. As you can see, identify covers top to bottom, protect and detect covers the majority of it, and then respond and recover. So with that, I've got about 5 minutes for questions and comments.
Great use of the stack. I mean, it would be good. I mean, it's interesting, referring back to the analytics discussion. We obviously need to do a stack for that. So it's maybe too early for that. So I appreciate that, but it's great to be able to present it that way. So
I think the thing that interests me the most about the two things that we've talked about today, and the stack and the specs, is both security and analytics fall on that operation side of the line. You look at most of Steve's presentation just now, there's not that much of it that's upfront technology. It's a huge amount of ongoing process.
Right.
And the analytics that John and I talked about before, it's the same thing. It's ongoing process. So how do we educate the market that maybe Division 2525 has a lot to do with the operational component of buildings and budget accordingly? But it's different than what has come before. So it's services rather than products or processes or projects.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, Jim. That's the thing about cyber is it's never done. It's an ongoing. You either commit yourself to paying attention, or you're just setting yourself up for future problems.
Right.
Yep.
Steve, a similar question that I put to, I guess, Jim and John. Do you, and I'm guessing the answer is no, but do you see there's tiers or levels of amounts of security in each one of those categories? I mean, can I just get away
there's
with
basically security and depth. And when I
Okay.
mentioned about the business environment, Ano, you're not going to have, there's some basic things that everybody should do. And then
Right.
there are things like with a data center that you're going to be far, far more rigorous in terms of the levels of protections that you're going to want to put in place that you're going to feel are necessary. You bet.
I get that. I guess the question is, would that be sort of identified in some context within the spec? Or could you do that? Or is that easy to do? Or is that really a complex question?
I guess we'll find out when I do it.
Yeah, fair enough. Good answer.
Would it,
Yeah.
would it be possible to come at this from a existing building approach and basically come up for both of these specifications for the existing building operations, and then basically try and attach that to the new building specification? Because that's really the problem, is that transition. That's always been our problem in the industry, is we build new buildings and then we figure out how to operate them later. Is there any way that we can, because the operations is significantly different than the bricks and mortar, is there any way that we could kind of build that, make it a useful document for existing buildings, get people using it, getting real experience, and then pull it back in as a place to leap to with a new building?
I've heard comments about specs being more focused on new buildings, and what about old buildings? That I think that's the generality of your question.
You know, it's interesting because it's a great question, Ken, and I'm almost wondering if we're trying to segment for the first time this industry, because as we've been saying, Jim Lee in particular always mentions this, that everything's new construction driven. And engineers don't think of themselves, consulting engineers that is, don't think of themselves as writing specifications for existing buildings, how to make an existing building run better. Forget about putting new systems in, just what can I do to improve the operations of an existing building? And cyber is one that fits that mold. Analytics obviously does. So, you know, it's interesting that what we're doing here is in C4SB is really a focus on operational improvements in existing buildings. And it's almost, you know, you could conceive what is completely broken out from the traditional way any of us think about selling a system. It's like, let's go into a building and make it run better. That's just a whole different mindset than selling a new system to a new building. And
obviously existing buildings is the majority of buildings, so
right,
be hugely valuable.
The other thing that's going on, of course, is decarbonization and electrification. You're going to have a tough fight to build a brand new building. You're probably going to be forced to fluff up an old building. And the electrification is exactly the same thing. I think you're going to see a lot of retrofits there. You're going to see a lot of major So I think I think potentially we're looking at, we could have quite a shift. And if we could kind of lead that, that would be really useful, I think.
We are past the top of the hour, so we need to start to wrap this. I think this has been a really, really good conversation, and the existing building sort of issue, I think, is potentially a subject for another show just on that, on the applicability of what we're doing for that. So that would be great. So with that, thank you, John, Jim, and Steve for contributing to this week's show. And thank you, everybody, for being here. And we'll have the video tomorrow on YouTube. And next week, we will start on the collaboration conversations for the month of October. So with that, thank you, everybody. And have a
Hey,
great
gang.
Thank you.
Later.
Hi, thanks, everyone.
Bye.